Hello, we're going to start a new unit today, and that is 8.4 and 8.5. Now, the reason why we didn't include it in the other sections in Chapter 8 is because there is an annoying similarity. Enough so that I have just noticed that it is easy to get things mixed up. So, I like to separate these two sections, 8.1 to 8.3, and 8.4 and 8.5. And so hopefully that should help. So our goal for today is to understand the overall purpose of transcription and translation, to know where they occur, and then what are the events that occur during transcription. And we're going to sneak into the code that is there. Now, you guys might have, when you were kids, usually I notice that when you're a little kid, somewhere around fourth grade, fifth grade, and maybe even middle school, you start getting into there's usually a phase that people go over, and that is like knowing a code, breaking a code, using a secret code, and it is a lot of fun. Knowing that only you know this secret language. And I can remember that was a big thing in middle school, especially when you pass notes. So that's kind of what we're going to learn about. Our cells use a code for building things. Now, I'm going to set up a situation which is going to seem a little silly at first. And I know we're all mature freshmen and sophomores and juniors and seniors in high school. We're all big guys and gals, big men on campus, right? However, there was a time that we probably believed in Santa, and I honestly don't remember a time I never really believed in Santa. I know that may sound awful, but I never did. But just for the sake of argument, let's go ahead and use Santa's workshop as a way to kind of frame what we're going to talk about today. So, if as we're watching our Christmas movies, we have Polar Express, Elf, and it comically shows Santa's workshop. So, think about it. What do we need to build toys? Well, what we need, of course, are elves. We need elves that are going to make different toys. We have elves that make stuffed animals, elves that might be making Legos or K'NEX or other building sets. Other elves might be making electronic games. But along with elves that are dedicated to that, what we need are the instructions to build the toys. Now, if you think about uh, the grandness of what Santa's workshop is, with all of the different elves working, then you can imagine there's probably some place, whether or not it's a great big file cabinet or a great big computer server, there's probably a set where Santa keeps all of the instruction manuals for making any toy. And it would make sense that in this grand set of instruction manuals, he's going to keep them safe, right? I mean, if you've got to build a Star Wars Lego set, you don't want to lose the ultimate copy of how to build a Star Wars Lego set. And so we need a grand repository of all of the instructions. And so think about that might be in Santa's office, in a computer server, or whatever. So these instructions are important, but the elves need the instructions to make the toys. So how do we get the instructions to the elves to make the different toys without compromising the importance of the grand set of the instructions? And what you might think about, well, okay, we've got the grand instruction manual. What if we make copies? And that's pretty reasonable, right? You might be thinking that I've got this grand set of instruction manuals for everything. Don't you like my sophisticated special effects here on my screen? Instruction manual for everything. But if I have elves that make dolls, then those elves only need the instructions to make dolls. And elves that make Legos only need the instructions to make Legos. And elves that are making games only need the instructions to make games. Well, that makes sense. You're going to keep the master copy, the grand copy of all of the instruction manuals, you're going to keep them in the office, but then you're going to make copies to the different elves. So you're going to send copies of the instruction manuals to the elves. And if you ponder it for a few seconds, that means you can make many, many, many copies. So if it is particularly popular this year to make or to get Star Wars Lego sets, then you can ramp up production and you can produce many copies of making those toys. Maybe next year we have Baby Yoda, or maybe that's this year. Maybe this year it's Baby Yoda, and so you tell the people who are making dolls, make a lot of Baby Yodas, and they're going to get a lot of instructions to make them. Now, so that means we need the copies, and that also means we need elves to make the copies, and we also then need elves to make the toys. And so that's what we want to kind of swing to is now that we've kind of got the idea, what does that mean for cells? And you might be thinking, she's nuts. Why is she going over Santa's elves? Well, here's why. Remember, we've got a one grand set of the instructions, but then we have this idea that we can send individual instructions and many copies of them to those that need them. Keep that in mind. So now let's go to our cell. And you're going to see there's a method to my madness. We have the nucleus, and the nucleus is that part of the cell that contains the DNA. You remember that. The DNA is in the nucleus, and the DNA contains information to make proteins. It also contains instructions to make RNA, but we're going to hold off on that for now. We want to focus on making protein. Now, the protein would be similar to making toys, right? And so you have a grand set of instructions inside our nucleus, all of the DNA. And then what our cells are going to do, our cells don't need all of the instructions. For instance, our stomach cells really only want to make the proteins that are for the stomach cells, right? If you're a stomach cell, you want to make stomach enzymes and stomach pumps, acid pumps, proton pumps. Well, you want to make those proteins. So you really only need the copies of the genes for the stomach. If you're a blood cell, you only want the genes that are for you. And if you're a brain cell, you only really want the genes to make brain proteins. All of those lovely neurotransmitters, we want to make them. And so we want to only give those instructions to them. And in fact, we kind of talked briefly about this idea when cells don't follow their instructions, they become cancer cells. And one of the hallmarks of cancer cells is they don't know what to make. They go all wonky. They make whatever they want, and that's a problem. So sections of the DNA that are called genes, they code for the instructions to make proteins. And that's what we're going to look at. So stomach cells only need to copy the genes for stomach proteins. Brain cells only need to copy the genes for the brain proteins. Now, what we're getting into is this idea that we're going to copy certain genes and make those proteins. And we call this the central dogma. Dogma is a word that can be used in a negative fashion, like, oh, you're so dogmatic. You are uncompromising. You believe in something, and that is it. But dogma can also simply mean a foundational rule, right? So this is the central idea of biology. It doesn't matter what biology class you take, you will probably learn about the central dogma. And the central dogma is that we have a set of instructions, DNA, and we're going to make a copy of that DNA. We're going to make a copy called messenger RNA. Now that's been broadened to just mean RNA, but that's okay. So DNA, we're going to make a copy into RNA, just like Santa copying only a set of instructions. We're going to make a copy into RNA. And then using that RNA, we're going to build not a toy, but we're going to build a protein. And that's going to be our central dogma. So let's take a look at this. We call the process where we make a copy transcription. Now, you've heard of that, of part of that word before, script. If you go to the doctors and they give you a prescription, that's a written copy of the medicine, right? You shall take this, and here, give this to the pharmacist. So transcription means you're going to copy. And in this case, you're going to copy DNA into RNA. Now, sorry about that. You only want a copy of that gene. You don't need to copy the whole set of DNA, just that gene. But you can make multiple copies of that. So, for instance, if you're a red blood cell and you want to make a lot of hemoglobin protein, you want a lot of copies of the hemoglobin gene. So, we would see a lot of hemoglobin mRNA. So remember, Santa is going to keep his grand set of instructions in his office and send out copies. So a cell has the grand set of DNA, all of the DNA. But if you want to make hemoglobin protein, you only want to copy the hemoglobin gene. You're going to make a hemoglobin RNA, and then you're going to use that RNA to build a protein. Now we call that process, sorry about that, we call that process where we're actually going to build a polypeptide protein, we're going to call that translation. So the order is we've got DNA, we're going to take DNA, make a copy, that is transcription. We transcribe DNA into RNA. Now, let's be careful. That doesn't mean DNA turns into RNA. We're going to use the DNA and copy DNA into mRNA. We're going to make a copy. And then we're going to take RNA and use that RNA to build a protein. Now, that protein can also be called polypeptide. That for now is synonymous. And that process is called translation. So DNA transcribed into mRNA, mRNA translated into a protein. Now, where does this occur? In prokaryotes, they all take place in the cytoplasm. So notice we've got DNA transcribed into an mRNA, and then that mRNA gets translated into a polypeptide. In eukaryotic organisms, remember we've got a nucleus. In eukaryotic organisms, we transcribe the DNA gene into mRNA. In this case, we've got a little extra step where we can process the mRNA. And then notice translation occurs in the cytoplasm on a ribosome. So that is where everything takes place. What I want you to do right now is use what you learned in the last few pages to make a diagram of your central dogma.